I always start by cleaning the skin, which I've just done with a little bit of Brisk by PPI before going straight in with my Prosthetic. I'm just flattening the brows a little bit. It's not completely necessary because the thickness of the brow blockers will hide any shape from the hair underneath anyway. However, it is going to give me a better surface for my next stage of adding packs. Packs is acrylic paint mixed with Prosthetic. I'm using Mel packs, which is pre-made. You can also make your own. And I'm just using a peachy tone to start with to hide the darkness of the hair, just like you would do if you were covering a tattoo or doing a bald cap. And I'm applying it quite mottled. I don't want a really solid shape underneath my prosthetic that's going to show through. So I'm just stippling it on with a small amount of stipple sponge. And then I would dry my layers in between to make sure they're completely set. As I'm gluing with Prosthetic, Pax is the perfect base because it also contains Prosthetic, so it's going to help with my bond, and I know nothing's going to move around underneath. I'm now using a lighter flesh tone on top of that. It's obviously much lighter, but I'd rather have the lightest undertones in there as it's easier to cover than if I go too dark. Again, I'm using a small bit of stipple sponge, just patting that on, and then I start to feather it out a tiny bit, especially towards the top, so I don't have a hard shape showing through my prosthetic. Obviously we can still see some of the brow and the grooves and the colour, but this isn't meant to be perfect. It's all going to sit underneath my prosthetic. I'm just creating a slightly better base for me to work on top of. Once I'm happy that it's completely dry, I can start going on with my Prosthetic for my prosthetic, and I'm just brushing that on everywhere I know it's going to sit, taking it just onto the top of the brow bone as well, as it's a harder place to sort of get in with a brush once you've laid down your prosthetic. Again, when I'm happy with my glue, I need to give it a blow dry just to make sure it's gone completely clear. Any milkiness will stop the prosthetic from sticking. Then you can see I'm lining it up, just sort of tapping it down in the middle, making sure it's covering the complete brow before I start properly pasting it down. Prosthetic works best as a contact adhesive, so I did also glue the back of my piece just where the silicone was to make sure I've got a firm bond. Here I'm tapping it down everywhere that I've got glue already, and then I'm going back in with more Prosthetic where I need it. You can see maybe that I'm painting onto the skin and onto the back of the cat plastic again to create that contact bond. I could glue a section and dry it and lay it down, but I sometimes find it easier to glue all the way around and just leave the pieces to dry as I go. And then I am adding a tiny bit more underneath, which is much more fiddly, but just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to hit silicone when I blended away there. So once that's all gone clear, again I'm laying down my edges, and I'm using a small powder puff just to really make sure I've squished out any air bubbles or any little wrinkles that might want to form. I'm kind of stretching it, but making sure it lays down where it wants to still. I just don't want it to be baggy, and equally I don't want to overstretch it because then throughout the day it can start to try and shrink back and you'll get cracks in your makeup. I've just switched to a hand fan to dry the glue under the brow because I'm so close to the eye. It's a little bit nicer than holding a hairdryer directly at someone's eye. And then once that's gone clear, I can push that all down again with my powder puff. Now I've not glued all of the cat plastic underneath, as you can see, because I want to still keep it as close to the brow. I don't want to glue onto an eyelid, which is such fine skin. You often get wrinkling if you've got cat plastic there. So I've tried to keep it minimal underneath the brow. Next, everyone's favourite bit, blending off the edges, which I use pure acetone for on a cotton bud. And if you see, I'm sort of holding the flashing away from the skin as I blend it. This way I'm creating a bit of tension on my cat plastic, and I should be able to use a minimal amount of acetone. So as soon as that cotton bud hits the cat plastic, it just melts away and not much is getting on the skin at all. I often get asked about using acetone around the eyes, but if you work slowly and carefully like this and you're using very minimal amounts and have nice fine cat plastic, it shouldn't get much on the skin at all. Obviously my model has kept his eyes closed the whole time, so there's no risk of fumes. Then once it's all off, I can just work round again with small amounts of acetone on my cotton bud and just get rid of any little frilly edges or glue bogies that might be still there. After this, it's just time to colour up, which I do with alcohol paints. I've just used Skin Illustrators for everything today, and I paint everything with cut down chip brushes so I can spatter. I like to start with Rose Adjuster every time just to get that redness back in the skin. No matter what skin tone, there's always red underneath, so that's a good place to start. And I try and keep my paints as diluted as possible, so I'm flicking fine mists. That way I feel like even if a colour is slightly wrong, you've not added so much that you can't come back from that. After that Rose Adjuster pink that I've started with green now, which is the Olive Adjuster, just doing a layer of that before going now in with some skin tones. Just a couple of different light skin tones. One's slightly more red toned, as Sean does have a lot of red in his cheeks and his forehead. All the time I'm making sure my paints are diluted. I keep adding more IPA to my palette to make sure I'm adding it in thin mists rather than any distinguishable spatter marks. For the whole colouring process, I keep standing back to look at my colour and also checking it through the camera screen, but if you have the option to look outside in natural light during, that will also really help. And I'm really just going back and forth in the colours, checking what I need, what I'm missing. I think I'm adding a little bit of a light yellow here, and I do go back in with pink, a bit more green towards the end. I could spend a lot more time working on these, getting them perfect, adding freckles, skin details, but essentially I just wanted to show you how we could use these brow blockers to cover the brows without the shape or colour showing through at all. And Sean has really big wiry brows, so the large ones were definitely a good choice. You may want to seal it at this point, which I haven't done for this video, but there's loads of great ones you can choose from, whether you want something matte or gloss, or you want to buy one that you can spray on as a mist. I'd also keep some anti-shine handy, just for on set in case any of the edges start to twinkle.